In his late 90s, in the city of Chicago, a man named Russ Gremel did something that made the newspapers. He gave away $2 million. He used it to protect a forest, to create a wildlife sanctuary of roughly 400 acres of woodland, wetland, and prairie. A permanent green place where herons would nest and deer would walk, and children would one day learn the names of trees. $2 million is a great deal of money to give away. And here is what made Russ Gremel's gift extraordinary. He had not earned that $2 million at a high-paying job. He had not inherited it. He had not built a business or won anything. The entire $2 million gift had grown from a single decision Russ Gremel made around the year 1945, when he took roughly $1,000 and bought stock in a drugstore company. Russ Gremel lived an ordinary, modest life. He was, by every account, a frugal man, a man who lived simply, who kept the same plain habits for the better part of a century. He was not a financier. He was not wealthy in any way the world could see. He was a quiet Chicagoan who loved the outdoors and who had, long ago, made one good decision and then possessed the rarest discipline of all. He left it completely alone. $1,000, one company, one decision, and roughly 70 years of never, ever selling. That is the entire recipe. And at the end of it stood a 400-acre forest that will outlive everyone who reads this. This is the story of how he did it, and what it can teach the rest of us. Russ Gremel was born in Chicago in 1908. He grew up in the city in the early decades of the 20th century, in modest circumstances. He came of age, as so many of the people in this channel's stories did, in a hard and uncertain America, one that taught a generation the deep, permanent value of thrift. He lived a long, modest, deeply rooted life in his city. He was a frugal man, genuinely, instinctively frugal, and he remained so for the better part of a century. He did not spend extravagantly. He did not chase comfort or display. He kept the same plain habits, the same simple way of living, decade after decade. To Russ Gremel, frugality was not a hardship or a sacrifice. It was simply the natural shape of a sensible life. But the heart of Russ Gremel, the thing that gives this whole story its shape, was not money at all. It was the natural world. Russ Gremel loved the outdoors. He loved forests, wetlands, wild places, and the creatures that lived in them. He was deeply involved across his long life with the scouting movement and with the cause of conservation. He spent his time among trees. He understood the patient rhythms of the woods, the slow growth of an oak, the turning of the seasons, the way a forest takes a human lifetime and more to truly come into its own. And it is worth pausing on that, because it is not a coincidence. A man who genuinely loves forests has already trained his mind in the one skill that long-term investing most requires: patience. The patience to plant something and tend it and wait, not for a season, but for decades, trusting a slow process you cannot rush and will not see completed quickly. Russ Gremel had spent his life loving things that grow on the time scale of oak trees. When he came to invest, he simply applied the patience the forest had already taught him. He never married. He lived modestly and simply in Chicago for nearly his entire life. He was known to those around him as a kind, plain-living, generous man, devoted to young people and to the natural world. No one looking at Russ Gremel's quiet life would have guessed that he was, slowly and silently, becoming a millionaire. Around the year 1945, Russ Gremel made the single financial decision that would define the rest of his life, and eventually protect 400 acres of Illinois woodland forever. He took roughly $1,000 and he bought stock in Walgreens, the drugstore company, founded and headquartered in his own city of Chicago. $1,000 in 1945 was a meaningful sum. It was real savings, set aside by a frugal man over time. And the choice of where to put it tells you something important about Russ Gremel. He did not chase a speculative thrill. He did not buy something exotic or mysterious. He bought a drugstore company, Walgreens, a business he could see with his own eyes, in his own city. A company that sold medicine and household goods and the small everyday necessities that people would need in good times and in bad, for as long as anyone could foresee. There is a piece of wisdom hidden in that choice, and it deserved to be named. Russ Gremel bought a company whose business he genuinely understood. He did not need a finance degree to grasp what a drugstore did. People get sick. People need medicine. People need the small goods of daily life. A well-run company that supplies those things in a growing country is likely to keep doing so for a very long time. It is a boring observation. It is also a profound one. Russ Gremel bought something simple, something durable, something he could believe in for the length of a lifetime, because he was, in fact, planning to hold it for exactly that long. And then Russ Gremel did the thing that turned $1,000 into $2 million. He did nothing. He never sold, not for some 70 years, not one share. Think hard about the 70 years that followed that purchase. Russ Gremel held his Walgreens shares through the entire second half of the 20th century and well into the 21st. He held through the post-war boom and the recessions that punctuated it. He held through the brutal bear market of the early 1970s when American stocks lost nearly half their value. He held through the stagflation of the late 1970s. He held through the crash of 1987. He held through the dot-com collapse and through the financial crisis of 2008. Decade after decade, crisis after crisis, Russ Gremel simply held his one company and let it grow the way he had watched 10,000 oak trees grow. Slowly, quietly, without his interference. The first principle of Russ Gremel's fortune was the one his whole life had prepared him for. The patience to let a slow thing grow. Most people, when they buy a stock, are already half thinking about selling it. They watch the price. They feel the small daily thrill or fear of its movement. They are, in their minds, renting the stock, holding it temporarily, waiting for the moment to get out. Russ Gremel did not think that way at all. When Russ Gremel bought his Walgreens shares, he was not renting them. He was planting them. He bought them the way a man plants an oak, with the full intention that they would still be standing, grown and strong, long after he was gone. This difference between renting a stock and planting one is one of the most important ideas in all of investing. And Russ Gremel's life makes it almost impossible to miss. The renter is anxious. The renter checks the price, reacts to the news, feels every tremor of the market, and sells, almost always, at some moment of fear or impatience, cutting the growth short. The planter is calm. The planter has decided at the very beginning that time is an ally and not a threat. The planter does not check the price, because the price on any given day is irrelevant to a thing being grown across decades. Russ Gremel was a planter. And planters, given enough years, grow forests. Consider what Russ Gremel's patience protected him from. In the 70 years he held Walgreens, there were countless moments when an ordinary investor would have sold. Moments of fear when the market crashed and the headlines screamed. Moments of temptation when the price had risen and it felt clever to take the profit. Moments of doubt, of boredom, of distraction. Each of those moments was a small invitation to interrupt the compounding. And Russ Gremel declined every single one of them. For 70 years. His patience was not one decision. It was tens of thousands of small refusals to interfere, each one quietly protecting the slow growth of the tree. And here is what that patience earned, in the language of arithmetic. A single excellent company, held for 70 years, with its dividends quietly reinvested into more shares, does not grow in a straight line. It compounds. Walgreens, across those decades, grew its business, raised its dividends, and split its stock again and again. Each split multiplying Russ Gremel's share count, each dividend buying still more shares. $1,000 compounding inside one strong company for 70 years, crossed, quietly, invisibly, while Russ Gremel walked in his forests, the line into $1 million, and then kept climbing toward 2. Russ Gremel did not get rich because he was a brilliant analyst. He got rich because he understood, in his bones, the timescale of growing things, and because he had the patience, learned among oak trees to let one good investment grow for the full length of a human life without ever once reaching in to disturb it. The first principle was patience. The second principle was the one that made the patience possible. Russ Gremel lived so frugally, so simply, and so far within his means that he never, in 70 years, had to reach into his Walgreens shares. Picture the long arc of an ordinary life, and all the moments in it when a person reaches for their savings. A larger home, a newer car, a more comfortable standard of living as the years go by. A want indulged here, an upgrade there. For most people, an investment is not a tree they plant and leave standing. It is a woodpile, something they steadily draw from, branch by branch, as the wants of life arise. Russ Gremel never treated his Walgreens shares as a woodpile. He treated them as a living tree, and a living tree is not for burning. How did he manage that across 70 years through every temptation a long life can hold? The answer is the frugality. Russ Gremel kept his cost of living genuinely low, and crucially, he kept it low permanently. His way of living did not expand. Not as the decades passed, not as his quiet portfolio grew, not as he aged. He wanted little, he spent little, and he lived comfortably within whatever ordinary income his life provided. And because his life never cost more than he could plainly afford, the Walgreens shares were never needed. They were never a source of rescue, or comfort, or upgrade. They were simply left alone to grow. This is the deep partnership at the center of every story on this channel, and Russ Gremel shows it with unusual purity. Patience and frugality are not two separate virtues. They are two halves of one machine. Patience is the decision not to sell. Frugality is what makes that decision survivable. You cannot hold an investment for 70 years through willpower alone. You can only hold it for 70 years if your life, the entire time, is arranged so that you never have to sell it. Russ Gremel's frugality was not separate from his investing success. It was the soil the whole forest grew in. And notice what Russ Gremel's frugality also did to his sense of the money itself. Because he never needed the Walgreens shares, he never thought of them as spending money. They were not, in his mind, $2 million he was choosing not to enjoy. They were something else entirely. A growing thing, a standing forest, an accumulating gift he was holding in trust for a purpose he had not yet fully named. The frugal life did not feel to Russ Gremel like deprivation, because he was not depriving himself of anything he actually wanted. He wanted a simple life and a healthy forest. He had the first already, and he was, share by share, growing the second. We will be honest, as this channel always is. Russ Gremel had no spouse and no children, and his costs were genuinely lighter than most people's. We are not asking anyone to want nothing, but the principle beneath his frugality is universal, and it is unbreakable. An investment can only compound for as long as you can leave it untouched, and you can only leave it untouched if you build a life that does not require you to reach for it. Russ Gremel built exactly that life, and so his tree was allowed to become a forest. The third principle of Russ Gremel's story is the one that gave the other two their meaning. He always knew, in some quiet form, what the money was for. Russ Gremel loved the natural world. He had spent his life in service to it, to scouting, to conservation, to the cause of wild and protected places. He knew that across America, year after year, wildland was being lost. Forests cleared, wetlands drained, prairies paved. He knew that the green places he loved were not permanent unless someone made them permanent, unless someone bought the land and protected it, and placed it beyond the reach of development forever. And protecting land in that way takes money. A great deal of money. Here is what made Russ Gremel's decades of patience so unshakable. He was not compounding his Walgreens shares in order to get rich. Wealth, for its own sake, held no interest for a man who lived as simply as he did. He was compounding the shares because he understood, perhaps better than he ever said aloud, that a small thing, left to grow for long enough, could one day become large enough to buy a forest. The patience was never abstract. It had a destination. Every year Russ Gremel did not sell. The eventual forest grew a little larger and a little more certain. He was not hoarding money. He was, quietly and across 70 years, growing a sanctuary. This is the lesson this channel returns to in every single episode, and Russ Gremel embodies it almost perfectly. Know what your wealth is for. The people who compound successfully across decades are almost never the people who simply want more. They are the people who have a purpose, a clear, real, deeply felt destination for the money, and who find, because of that purpose, that the discipline is not a burden at all. Russ Gremel did not have to force himself to be patient. He wanted the forest more than he wanted anything money could have bought him along the way. And so the 70 years of holding were not 70 years of sacrifice. They were 70 years of growing the thing he loved. There is a quiet symmetry here that is almost too perfect to be real. Russ Gremel spent 70 years applying the patience of a forester to a stock, holding it, tending it, letting it grow on the timescale of trees. And the harvest of that patience was an actual forest. The metaphor and the reality became the same thing. He grew his investment like a woodland, and then he used the grown investment to create a woodland. $1,000 planted in 1945 became 400 acres of standing trees. For most of the 70 years that his $1,000 was quietly becoming $2 million, Russ Gremel told the world, nothing at all. He did not announce his growing position. He did not boast of his good decision. He did not, by any account, build his identity around being a clever investor. He simply lived his modest life, walked his forests, served his causes, kept his frugal habits, while the certificate sat in its drawer, doing its slow and silent work. For decade after decade, the people who knew Russ Gremel knew a kind, plain-living, generous old Chicagoan. They did not know they were looking at a self-made millionaire. There is something instructive in that long silence, and it is the same lesson this channel keeps finding. Russ Gremel's compounding succeeded, in part, because no one was watching it. There was no audience pressuring him to do something with the money. No one envied the position, because no one knew it existed. No one urged him to sell, to spend, to display. The tree grew undisturbed, because Russ Gremel kept it out of sight, in a quiet drawer, in a quiet life, for 70 quiet years. And in keeping with everything this channel teaches, Russ Gremel did not arrange his great gift entirely alone. When the time came to convert 70 years of patience into a permanent forest, he worked with a conservation organization, a land trust, a group whose entire purpose is the protection of wild places. He did not simply have money. He had a partner with the knowledge and the structure to take his gift and turn it into protected acreage that would stand forever. We say this in every episode. The lone individual doing everything alone is not the model. The decision was Russ Gremel's. The 70 years of patience were his alone. But the execution, the turning of money into a lasting forest, was done with trusted, capable hands beside him. And here is a detail that captures the whole of Russ Gremel. He made his great gift while he was still alive. He did not leave it to be discovered in a will after his death. He gave the $2 million in his late 90s with his own hands while he could still see what it would do. He lived to see the sanctuary established. He lived to know that the forest would be real, that the herons would nest there, that children would walk its trails. Russ Gremel did not only grow a fortune for a purpose. He lived long enough and gave early enough to witness the purpose fulfilled. If you wanted to summarize what made it possible for Russ Gremel to grow a 400-acre forest from $1,000, you could do worse than this list. One simple company, understood and believed in. A frugal life that never needed the money. 70 years of a forester's patience. A purpose he loved more than any luxury. And the wisdom to give the gift, while he was still here to see it grow. In his late 90s, Russ Gremel took the Walgreens shares he had held since around 1945. by then worth roughly $2 million, and he gave them away to create a wildlife sanctuary. The gift created a nature sanctuary of roughly 400 acres, woodland, wetland, and prairie, set aside and protected, placed permanently beyond the reach of development. A place for herons and egrets and deer. A place where native plants would grow undisturbed. A place where the people of the region and their children and their children's children could walk among trees and learn what a healthy piece of the natural world actually looks like. $1,000 invested in a Chicago drugstore in 1945 had become 400 acres of permanent American wilderness. When the story reached the newspapers, people were moved by it, and rightly so. But notice exactly what they were moved by. It was not the image of a rich man giving away a fraction of an enormous fortune. It was something far rarer and far more inspiring. It was the image of an ordinary, frugal man, a man of modest means his whole life, who had, through one good decision and 70 years of patience, quietly grown the power to protect a forest. Russ Gremel proved something the world badly needs to hear. You do not have to be born wealthy, or become wealthy through some dramatic stroke, to leave a large and lasting mark on the world. You have to plant one good seed, and have the patience to let it grow into a forest. Think about the timescales that quietly fold together in this story. Russ Gremel held a stock for 70 years, longer than most human careers, longer than most marriages, longer than most lives are even paid attention to. And the forest his patience created will stand for far longer still. The oak trees in that sanctuary will outlive everyone alive today. The wetlands will shelter birds for centuries. Russ Gremel took a single decision made by a young man in 1945 and stretched its consequences forward into a future none of us will see. That is what patient capital aimed at a purpose can do. It can reach across time. He had no children to inherit his wealth. He had no family business to pass down. But he had a purpose, the one he had carried quietly his entire life. And he gave 70 years of patient compounding entirely to that purpose. He wanted a piece of the natural world he loved to be permanent. And with $1,000 and a lifetime of patience, he made it so. Now, what does Russ Gremel's story actually teach us? Lesson 1. Plant your investments. Do not rent them. Russ Gremel bought his Walgreens shares with the full intention of never selling, and that intention changed everything. The renter watches the price, reacts to fear, and sells too soon. The planter decides at the outset that time is an ally, and is therefore never tempted to interrupt the growth. Before you buy anything, decide which one you are. Buy as a planter, and then let the tree grow. Lesson 2. Patience and frugality are a single machine. Russ Gremel could hold his shares for 70 years, only because his frugal life never forced him to sell them. These are not two separate virtues. They work as one. Patience is the decision not to sell. Frugality is what makes that decision possible to keep. If you want to hold an investment for decades, you must build a life that does not require you to reach for it. Keep your cost of living low and stable, and you give your investments the one thing they need most: the freedom to be left alone. Lesson 3. Time is the multiplier. Russ Gremel held for 70 years. Not 7, not 17, 70. That span is the single ingredient his result most depended on, and it is the one ingredient that cannot be bought, borrowed, or hurried. You can increase your savings next month. You can choose a better investment tomorrow, but you cannot add years to the beginning of your record. The earliest years are worth the most because they compound the longest. This is why the most expensive financial decision most people ever make is the decision to wait. Russ Gremel did not wait. He planted his seed as a young man and gave it the whole of a long life. Lesson 4. Buy what you genuinely understand. Russ Gremel bought a drugstore company, a simple, durable business he could see with his own eyes and believe in for a lifetime. He did not need to understand anything complex or exotic. He understood that people need medicine and everyday goods in good times and bad, and that a well-run company supplying them would likely endure. You do not need to be sophisticated. You need to own things simple and durable enough that you can hold them calmly for decades. Because conviction in a crash comes from understanding. Lesson 5. Have a circle. Russ Gremel made the decision himself. The 70 years of patience were his alone, but he did not execute his great gift alone. He worked with a conservation land trust, a partner with the knowledge and structure to turn his money into a forest that would last. This channel says it every episode. The lone individual doing everything in isolation is not the model. You make your own decisions, but you need trusted, capable people to help you execute them, to hold the paperwork, to carry out the plan, to turn your patient money into the thing you actually intend. Lesson 6. Know what it's for. Russ Gremel knew, in some quiet form, across his whole life, what his money was for, and that knowledge is what made 70 years of patience effortless rather than painful. He was not compounding to be rich. He was compounding to grow a forest. Because the purpose was real and deeply loved, the discipline never felt like sacrifice. If you do not know what your wealth is ultimately for, you will spend more of it than you should, and the patience will erode. If you do know, if the purpose is real and you can feel it, then the decades of holding become the joyful, patient growing of the thing you love. And there is one more gift in Russ Gremel's story. One last lesson, and it is the warmest of them all. Russ Gremel gave his fortune away while he was still alive to see it. He did not leave the forest to be discovered in a will. He created it with his own hands in his late 90s, and he lived to walk among its trees and know that it was real. Many people in this channel's stories built magnificent fortunes that they themselves never got to enjoy the meaning of. Russ Gremel did. So build with his patience and his frugality, but learn too from his timing. If you can, do not save every gift for after you are gone. Grow your forest in time to walk in it. Before we close, a practical bridge from Russ's story to your situation. Because a case study is only useful if it changes something this week. 1. Plant a seed this week, however small, and decide in advance never to sell it. Russ Gremel's $1,000 changed nothing on the day he invested it. Its power came entirely from the 70 years he then gave it. Choose an amount you can genuinely leave alone, invest it, and make the decision, clearly and consciously, that this money is planted, not rented. The decision to never sell is itself the most powerful thing you will do. 2. Own a broad, durable piece of the whole economy. Russ Gremel happened to choose one excellent company, but a single company is a real risk, and most people should not take it. You can capture his patient growth far more safely. A single, broad, low-cost, total market index fund makes you a part owner of hundreds or thousands of durable companies at once. If anyone falls, the forest still stands. Buy the whole woodland, not a single tree. 3. Keep your cost of living low and stable, so you never have to fell the tree. Russ Gremel's frugality was the soil his whole forest grew in. This week, look honestly at your fixed costs, especially the largest ones, and resist letting them climb as your income climbs. A stable, modest cost of living is what gives your investments the freedom to be left untouched for decades. Protect the soil, and the tree will grow on its own. 4. Switch on automatic dividend reinvestment and build friction against selling. Russ Gremel let his dividends quietly buy more shares, and he never reached into the position. Turn on automatic dividend reinvestment for every long-term holding, set once, forgotten forever. And make selling deliberately inconvenient. Check your portfolio rarely, delete the app that tempts you to trade. When the next crash comes, and it will, make leaving the tree alone the easiest possible thing to do. 5. Decide what your forest is for, and if you can, plan to see it grow. Russ Gremel knew his purpose his whole life, and he gave his gift early enough to walk in it. Write down what your wealth is ultimately for: your family, a cause, your own freedom, a place or an idea you love. Make it real and specific. And then consider Russ Gremel's timing. Where you can, let your patient money do visible good while you are still here. A gift given in life, a purpose witnessed, a forest you get to walk in before you are gone. If you do those 5 things, even imperfectly, even slowly, you are running, on your own scale, the same program Russ Gremel ran for 70 years. You may not grow a 400-acre forest from a single $1,000, but you will end up far further along than the great majority of people who out-earned you and outspent you every single year. And you may, like Russ Gremel, grow something that outlasts you. That is the quiet promise of compound interest, proven in a Chicago drawer and an Illinois forest by a frugal man who planted one seed and had the patience to let it become a woodland. Russ Gremel spent nearly a century living a modest, frugal life in Chicago, walking in forests, serving the cause of wild and protected places. To everyone who knew him, he was a kind, plain-living old man of ordinary means. That was the visible life. It was only a fraction of the truth. Behind that quiet life, a frugal Chicagoan who loved the woods, at around 1945, planted $1,000 in a single drugstore company, and then, with the patience of a man who understood oak trees, left it standing, untouched, for 70 years. It grew into $2 million, and in his late 90s, with his own hands, and while he could still see it done, he turned that grown fortune into a 400-acre forest that will outlive us all. We talk a great deal in modern personal finance about getting rich quickly, about leverage, side income, the perfect entry, the well-timed exit. All of those things have their place. But the quiet truth, the one the financial press rarely tells, because it is slow and it does not sell, is that the most reliable path to deep, durable, world-changing wealth is the one Russ Gremel walked. Patient, boring, consistent, unglamorous. Decade after decade after decade. Effective. If there is a North Star in this channel, a single thesis we will return to in every story, in every case study, it is this: ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary patience build slow fortunes. More of them are out there, right now, in modest homes, growing quiet things than the world will ever notice. And the country, its libraries, its hospitals, its schools, and now its very forests, is shaped quietly by their hands. If you want more stories like this one, stories of ordinary, underestimated people who built extraordinary things, subscribe. There is no shortage of them. We are only getting started.